Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're stepping into a world that is just, well, it's visually vibrating.
That's a great way to put it.
It's a world of infinite reflections, glowing lights, and of course, dots. I mean, thousands and thousands of polka dots.
Uncountable polka dots.
Exactly. And if you have been anywhere near a major museum in the last, say, 10 years, or honestly, if you've just scrolled through Instagram, you have seen this work.
Oh, it's unavoidable.
Yeah.
In the best way.
Yeah.
We are, of course, talking about the Princess of Polka Dots herself, Yayoi Kusama.
And it is such a fascinating subject to tackle because when you think of Kusama, your mind probably jumps right to those iconic images.
Right. The bright yellow pumpkins covered in black spots, or maybe those mirrored rooms that feel like you're stepping into a galaxy.
They seem to go on forever, and the thing is, she's currently acknowledged as the world's top-selling female artist.
And not just female artist, the most successful living artist, period. That's a staggering title.
Which is huge, a massive title. But here's the hook, and this is the thing that really stops you in your tracks when you start digging into the research. While her art is selling for millions, while she's collaborating with these huge luxury brands like Louis Vuitton, she doesn't live in a penthouse in Manhattan or, a villa in Tuscany.
No, not at all. Since 1977, she has voluntarily lived in a mental health facility in Tokyo.
It reframes everything. For nearly 50 years, she has resided in this hospital by her own choice.
It's her safe space. She wakes up in her room at the facility, and she just walks a short distance to her studio every single day to work. The routine is the anchor.
Completely. And that is our mission for this deep dive. We want to unpack how a young girl from rural Japan used actual terrifying hallucinations to fuel an artistic revolution.
We have to. And we're going to look at her time in 1960s New York, which was, it was pivotal, it was wild, and honestly, it was pretty heartbreaking for her.
And we have to talk about this concept she has, self-obliteration. It sounds,
Yeah.
Well, it sounds scary, almost nihilistic.
It does, but it's the absolute key to unlocking her entire philosophy. So this isn't just an art history lesson for you.
Not at all. This is a study of resilience. It's about the intersection of severe mental health struggles and breathtaking creativity and race. And frankly, it's a critique of the art market's long history of sexism and racism.
It really is, a history she experienced firsthand.
So let's go back, way back to the beginning. Before the pumpkins, before New York, before the fame, we need to go to Matsumoto, Japan in 1929.
Right. So Yayoi Kusama was born into a pretty well-off family. They were wealthy merchants who owned a plant nursery and a huge seed farm.
So you have to imagine the setting. From day one, she is literally surrounded by plants, flowers, just fields and fields of zinnias and peonies.
It sounds idyllic, doesn't it? Like something out of a fairy tale.
It sounds beautiful, like a Studio Ghibli movie setting. But from what all the sources say, the reality inside the house was anything but. It was incredibly traumatic.
Yeah, idyllic is not the word. Her family dynamics were, well, let's say, complicated.
Complicated is being very generous.
Extremely. The environment was a pressure cooker. Her mother was reportedly physically abusive and just intensely, viciously unsupportive of Yayoi's art.
I read that Kusama would be drawing pictures of, the pumpkins or the flowers she saw in the nursery.
And her mother would just rush in and snatch them away from her before she could finish. Just rip them up.
Just to discourage her, to crush that impulse.
Exactly. And that explains why she developed this lifelong habit of rushing to finish her art. It's not just a burst of passion. It was a panic-driven need to get the image out before it could be destroyed.
And then there's the father.
The father was a serial womanizer. And in a really, really disturbing twist that shaped Kusama's entire psyche, her mother would force young Yayoi to spy on her father's extramarital affairs.
That is just horrific. To send a child to do that, I can't even imagine.
It's psychological warfare on a child.
Mm.
And it had this profound, lifelong impact. Kusama said very explicitly that this experience instilled in her a lifelong contempt for sexuality.
A fear, really.
A deep fear. She developed an intense phobia of the male body, specifically the phallus. There's a quote where she says, "The sexual obsession and fear of sex sit side by side in me." That's the core conflict.
So you have this high-stress, abusive environment, and then right in the middle of all this family trauma, the hallucinations start. She's only, 10 years old?
About 10, yes. And this is the true origin story of the polka dots. This wasn't a cool aesthetic choice she made.
No.
She describes this pivotal moment. She was sitting at the dining table, looking at a red flower pattern on the tablecloth, just staring at it. And when she looked up,
The pattern was everywhere.
everywhere.
Yeah.
She saw that same red flower pattern covering the ceiling, then the windows, then the walls.
And it didn't just stop there in the room.
No. This is the terrifying part. She looked down and saw the pattern crawling over her own body, her clothes, her hands. She felt like the universe was being covered in these dots. She felt she was being obliterated, completely erased. And this wasn't just, oh, I see spots. This was a full sensory overload. She talks about flashes of light, auras, dense fields of dots. She even said the violets in the fields would speak to her, that they had human-like faces.
That is genuinely terrifying for a child.
It's the definition of a waking nightmare.
Yeah.
The patterns threatened to engulf her. In one account, she ran upstairs to escape the spell of the red flowers, and she actually fell and sprained her ankle. This wasn't a daydream. It was a visceral, physical, frightening event.
And so art became the only way out.
The only way to cope. It was her escape mechanism. If she could paint the dots, if she could draw the nets she saw, then maybe she could control them.
By capturing the fear on paper, she could keep it from swallowing her whole.
Precisely. But then you have to layer on top of all of that the historical context. She's now entering her teenage years during World War II.
Right. So at age 13, she's conscripted to work in a military factory.
And she's sewing parachutes for the Japanese army. Can you imagine a more stark image? A young girl who was having these intense, colorful hallucinations, forced to sit in a dark factory, sewing gray silk parachutes for a war.
She described her adolescence as being spent in closed darkness, just hearing air raid sirens constantly, seeing American B-29 bombers flying overhead.
And that environment, the repression of the war, the trauma at home, it just solidified this desperate need for personal and creative freedom. She felt completely suffocated from all sides.
So the war ends, she survives, and she tries to become an artist in post-war Japan. She studies Nihongo.
Yes, which is a very traditional style of Japanese painting. She went to Kyoto to study it.
But she hated it.
Despised it. She found it far too restrictive. The whole master-disciple system, the rigid rules about what materials you could use, the specific techniques. It didn't work for an artist who was trying to paint her own mind.
So she decided she had to leave.
She had to. She famously said that Japanese society at the time was, in her words, too small, too servile, too feudalistic, and too scornful of women.
Yeah.
She knew she had no future there.
She makes a break for it, but before she leaves, she does something incredibly dramatic. It feels like a scene from a movie.
It really does. She took thousands of her early works, thousands of drawings and paintings, down to the riverbank behind her family's house, and she burned them.
A bonfire of her own art.
It was a total clean slate, a funeral for her past self. She was severing ties completely. She was going to America, and as she put it, she was going to survive or die trying. She sewed dollar bills into the lining of her kimono and left.
And she didn't just go blindly. She had this wild idea to reach out to Georgia O'Keeffe. How does that even happen?
It was a total Hail Mary pass. She was in a bookstore in Matsumoto, found a book of O'Keeffe's paintings, and was just stunned by them. She felt a connection. She found her address and just wrote a letter.
A young, unknown artist from rural Japan writing to one of the titans of American art.
Seeking advice, asking how to make it in the art world. And the most shocking part is that O'Keeffe wrote back.
That's amazing.
It is. O'Keeffe was very kind, but also realistic. She warned Kusama that it was incredibly hard for artists in America to make a living, especially for a woman and a foreigner at that.
But she didn't say don't come.
No. And that correspondence gave Kusama the courage she needed. It was a lifeline. And O'Keeffe became a sort of mentor. Later on, when Kusama was in New York and basically starving, O'Keeffe convinced her own art dealer to buy some of Kusama's work just to save her from financial ruin.
That's a true act of solidarity. So 1957, she arrives in the U.S., first Seattle for a year, then the big move to New York City in 1958.
And this is the absolute height of abstract expressionism. It's Pollock, de Kooning, Rothko. It is a swaggering, macho boys club.
And this is where she creates her first major breakthrough works, the Infinity Nets. Let's unpack what those are because they aren't the pumpkins yet.
Nope, no pumpkins yet. These were paintings. But they were enormous. I mean, some canvases were 30 feet long, just these vast fields of color.
And they were just covered in tiny loops of paint.
Entirely covered in these small, repeated, web-like loops or nets of paint. It was an obsessive act. She would paint for 40, 50 hours straight, without sleeping, without eating.
It goes right back to that hallucination of the tablecloth, doesn't it?
It's a direct translation. She was painting the net that she felt was covering the universe, threatening to obliterate her. And the critical reception, surprisingly, was very strong.
Really? In that macho art scene?
Yes. The minimalist heavyweight, Donald Judd, who later became a romantic partner for a time, he bought one and wrote a glowing review. The critic Herbert Reed praised them. She was even the only female artist in a really important group show in Amsterdam called Null, or Zero, in 1962.
So she's getting critical respect. She's in the mix. She's not an outsider in that sense.
She's in the critical conversation, yes. But she's making zero money. She talks in her autobiography about being so poor she would scavenge fish heads and cabbage leaves from the market garbage to make soup. She was freezing in her unheated loft.
And then we get to the theft. This part of the story, I mean, it just makes my blood boil every time I read about it.
It's a crucial turning point. And it explains so much of her later breakdown and paranoia. We're in the early 60s now, and Kusama moves from painting into sculpture. She starts making what she called soft sculptures.
These are the objects covered in the white stuffed phallic shapes, right?
Exactly. She would take everyday objects, an armchair, a ladder, a rowboat, shoes, and cover them in thousands of these white phallic protrusions that she sewed by hand from fabric.
And this connects directly back to her fear of sex, her phobia.
Directly. She called it accumulation. She said she was terrified of the phallus, so by making thousands of them, by surrounding herself with them, she was trying to conquer that fear through sheer repetition. It was kind of self-prescribed aversion therapy.
Okay, so she's doing this absolutely groundbreaking, psychologically charged work. And then what happens with Claes Oldenburg?
In 1963, Kusama has a show where she exhibits a couch completely covered in these phallic shapes. Claes Oldenburg, who was already a very famous pop artist, was in the same group show.
And what was his work like at the time?
He was working with hard materials, plaster, papier-mâché. He had never made a soft sculpture before.
I think I see where this is going.
He saw Kusama's couch. It got all the attention. Shortly after that show, Oldenburg debuts his first soft sculptures. You know, the giant plush hamburgers, the soft telephone. It became his signature style, the thing that made him a global superstar.
And it was Kusama's idea.
It was so blatant that Oldenburg's wife at the time, Patty Musha, actually went up to Kusama at an exhibit and apologized. She basically said, "I'm so sorry Yayoi Claes took your idea."
Wow, an apology. But that doesn't help her career.
Not at all. And then it happened again with Andy Warhol.
Oh, this is the wallpaper incident.
Yes. Kusama did an installation called 1,000 Boats. She took a real rowboat, covered it in her silver phalluses, and then she wallpapered the entire room, walls, ceiling, floor, with 999 repeated silk-screened photocopies of the boat. It was the first immersive single-image environment.
And who came to that exhibit?
Andy Warhol. He came to the show, was incredibly enthusiastic, shouting how wonderful and brilliant it was. And just a short time after that, he has a show at another gallery where he covers all the walls with his now famous cow wallpaper.
So you have Oldenburg taking the soft sculpture, Warhol taking the repeated wallpaper environment.
And Kusama's just watching this happen. She fell into a deep, deep depression. She said she felt her innovations were being stolen by these white male artists who were then catapulted to international stardom while she was still struggling to buy food.
Experts who've looked at this, like curator Helene Posner, they point directly to the mix of sexism and racism in the art world at the time.
Of course. She didn't have the institutional backing, the boys' club support that those men got. She was this lone Japanese woman doing this incredibly strange, intense work. She was too easy to plagiarize and ignore.
It's just heartbreaking. She was literally trying to work through the idea of obliteration, and she was being professionally obliterated.
And ironically, that pressure led to her next great innovation. Sewing thousands of phalluses was physically grueling. It was painful. It took forever. So to solve that labor problem, she turned to mirrors.
Right.
In 1965, she created her first infinity mirror room called Fally's Field. She filled a small mirrored room with her phallus-covered soft sculptures on the floor. And suddenly, with mirrors, she could create endless repetition, infinite space.
Which became the precursor to the rooms that everyone lines up for today. But back then, she was pivoting again. She started moving away from the gallery scene.
Well, she was so disillusioned, right? So she moved into the streets, the era of the happenings.
This is the late 60s. The hippie counterculture is in full swing.
And Kusama embraced it fully. She started organizing these wild performance art pieces in Central Park, on the Brooklyn Bridge, even crashing the Museum of Modern Art.
And these involved a lot of polka dots.
And a lot of public nudity.
A lot of nudity. She would paint polka dots on the naked bodies of participants. These were often political protests against the Vietnam War.
What was the connection there? The dots and the war?
Her idea was that if we were all covered in the same polka dots, we lose our individual egos, we become one with the universe. And you can't fight a war if you're all just particles in the cosmos. It was her philosophy of self-obliteration, made public and political.
We have to talk about the letter to Richard Nixon, because that is just unbelievably bold.
Chuckles. It really is. She wrote an open letter to then President Nixon, and she offered to have sex with him if he would stop the Vietnam War.
She actually wrote that.
Oh, yeah. The quote is something like, "Let's forget ourselves, dearest Richard, and become one with the absolute, all together in the altogether." It was this mix of genuine anti-war sentiment and brilliant self-promotion. That is quite an offer. I am assuming he did not take her up on it.
He did not respond, no. But it got her a lot of press. She also staged the grand orgy to awaken the dead at the MoMA in 1969.
Wait, at the MoMA, inside the museum?
In the sculpture garden, yeah. She led a group of 8 nude performers, her disciples, into the garden. They took off their clothes, stepped into the fountain, and started mimicking the poses of the famous sculptures by Malol and Picasso that were there.
It was completely unannounced, right? A guerrilla performance.
Totally. It was scandalous. It was meant to be a critique of the stiff, dead institution of the museum.
And then there was the Venice Biennale in 1966. She wasn't officially invited to participate, was she?
No, she just showed up. This is her piece, Narcissus Garden. She got some funding, had 1,500 plastic mirrored balls made, and set them up on the lawn outside the Italian pavilion.
And she stood there in a gold kimono.
Selling the balls to passersby for $2 each.
$2.
Yeah. She had a sign that said, "Your narcissism for sale." It was this brilliant, biting critique of the art market's commercialism. She was literally selling people their own reflection for cash.
The organizers must have loved that.
Oh, they shut her down immediately.
Yeah.
They said, "You can't sell art like you're selling hot dogs or ice cream cones at the Biennale." But the point was made.
But while she's making all these splashes in New York, getting famous as this avant-garde provocateur, the reaction back home in Japan was not so great.
It was devastating for her and her family. The news of her nude happenings and orgies reached Japan's conservative society. It brought immense shame to her family.
I read that her high school actually removed her name from the alumni list.
They did. They completely disowned her. She was a pariah.
And all this time, her mental health was really, really deteriorating.
Constantly. She was hospitalized regularly for exhaustion and overwork. She was attempting suicide. And her one real anchor in this very chaotic world was her relationship with the reclusive artist Joseph Cornell.
He was much older than her, right?
26 years older. It was a very passionate but entirely platonic relationship. Her phobia of sex prevented anything physical, but they were inseparable. They sketched each other, wrote letters every day. He was her emotional support. And when he died in 1972, she lost her footing in New York.
So 1973, she returns to Japan. And this starts what biographers call the crash period.
It's a complete crash. She goes back in ill health, both physically and mentally. And the reception in Japan was just hostile. The press labeled her a scandal queen.
She couldn't get her career going again.
No. She was deeply depressed. She was unable to paint. She tried to start an art dealing business, and it failed. She attempted suicide again. It really seemed like her career and maybe her life was over. She was largely forgotten by the Western art world and completely rejected by the Japanese art world.
And then comes the decision that changes everything. The year is 1977.
She finds a doctor who is pioneering the use of art therapy, and she makes a radical choice. She checks herself into the Seiwa Hospital for the mentally ill in Tokyo, and a while later, she decides to stay.
And she has been there ever since, by her own choice.
By choice. It provided the structure, the safety, the quiet she needed to survive. Her studio is just a short walk away. She's built a life where she can manage her illness and create her art. She says, "I fight pain, anxiety, and fear every day, and the only method I have found that relieved my illness is to keep creating art."
And during those early years in the hospital, when the art world had kind of moved on, she didn't stop working. She just changed her medium. She became a writer.
She did, a very prolific one. She wrote these shocking, visceral, surreal novels and poetry. Books with titles like Manhattan Suicide Addict and The Hustler's Grotto of Christopher Street. They kept her creative spark alive when painting was too difficult.
We should note, though, there is a controversy that has come up around this literary period.
Yes, and it's very important to mention it. In her 1983 autobiography and some of her other early writings, there were some undeniably racist comments about Black people.
It's a really difficult aspect of her legacy to reconcile, especially given her whole counterculture, love and peace persona from the 60s.
Absolutely. In late 2023, after these writings came to wider attention, She did issue an apology for the remarks, expressing deep regret, but it's a really important reminder that even figures we view as these progressive revolutionaries can hold deep-seated and harmful prejudices.
Right. It's part of the whole complicated picture of who she is. So she's in the hospital, she's writing. How does she get from being this forgotten scandal queen to being on Louis Vuitton handbags?
Yeah.
What's the turning point?
It was a very slow climb back. For most of the 70s and 80s, she was in obscurity. But in 1989, a retrospective at the Center for International Contemporary Arts in New York sort of reintroduced her to the West.
But the really big moment was 1993.
That was the game changer. She was chosen to represent Japan at the Venice Biennale.
The very same place she was kicked out of for selling mirrored balls in 1966.
The exact same place. And this time, she had her own pavilion. She was the first woman to represent Japan with a solo exhibition. That brought her back onto the global stage in a massive way. And that's when the pumpkins really started to become her icon.
The pumpkins, they are so iconic. Why pumpkins? Of all the things in her childhood nursery, why did that stick?
She's just always loved them. She says her grandfather used to take her to the seed harvesting grounds, and there would be these fields of them. To her, they represent a kind of alter ego. She finds them humorous, warm, comforting. She's called their form generous unpretentiousness.
And that's when she installed the famous yellow one on Naoshima Island in Japan in 1994.
Yes, the one at the end of the pier staring out at the sea. It became this huge pilgrimage site for art lovers. It actually got washed away in a typhoon a few years ago, but it was so beloved they reinstated it.
And from there, the commercial success it exploded.
It did. White Num 28, one of those early Infinity Net paintings, sold for $7.1 million in 2014. As of 2012, she already had the highest turnover of any living female artist. And then, yes, the Louis Vuitton collaborations.
The first one was in 2012 with Marc Jacobs, and then again in 2023.
Suddenly, her dots were everywhere. On handbags, on storefronts, you had George Clooney and ads covered in her dots. She became a global brand.
But the most fascinating part of this revival to me is the Instagram era. Her work feels like it was almost designed for social media decades before it existed.
That is the great irony of her late career fame. The infinity mirror rooms became these unbelievable viral sensations. Museums like the Broad in L.A. or the Hirshhorn in D.C. had lines around the block with timed 30-second tickets.
For the perfect selfie.
For the perfect selfie. And then you have the Obliteration Room, where visitors enter a completely white domestic space and are given colorful dot stickers to place anywhere they want.
It's pure engagement bait. It's interactive. It's colorful.
But there's a much deeper meaning there that maybe the selfie takers are missing.
Let's talk about that. Because her work, these rooms, they were created out of a fear of self-obliteration. They were expressions of isolation, of anxiety, of the feeling of losing your ego and dissolving into the infinite.
And now people use them to perfectly frame themselves, to center themselves in a photo. Look at M.E. in the infinity.
The ultimate act of self-promotion.
Exactly. Her 1966 piece, Narcissus Garden, was a critique of narcissism. Now her work has become the ultimate backdrop for digital narcissism. It's a really strange and fascinating evolution.
So let's dig into the philosophy of self-obliteration a bit deeper, because it's not just about disappearing or dying.
No, not at all. She has this great quote, "Polka dots are a way to infinity."
What does that mean to her?
Well, she sees the dot as having this dual form. It's the sun, which is energy and life, and it's also the moon, which is calm and serene. So when she covers a room or a body or a canvas in these dots, the individual ego, the self, it disappears. You become part of the environment. You become part of the larger universe.
So it's almost a spiritual unification, a kind of Buddhist concept of oneness.
In a way, yes. But it's always rooted in her disability, in her mental illness. The curator, Mika Yoshitake, made a really great point that these immersive works are designed to make the audience sympathize with her intrusive thoughts and hallucinations.
She wants you to feel what she feels.
She wants you to feel that disorientation, that sense of endless, overwhelming repetition. So when we walk into one of those mirror rooms, we are, in a sense, stepping inside her hallucinations.
And art becomes medicine.
It is her medicine. She says she doesn't see art as an end in itself. For her, it is a means to address the illness that originated in her childhood. It is, quite simply, survival.
That puts a completely different spin on the fun polka dots in the cool mirror rooms. You aren't just looking at pretty colors, you are standing inside someone's trauma that they have managed to externalize to stay alive.
It absolutely does. It makes the work so much more powerful and incredibly poignant.
So to recap, we have gone from a little girl in a seed farm, seeing the tablecloth pattern crawl up her arms, to a dark parachute factory during a war, to the cutthroat, sexist art world of 60s New York.
To being forgotten and checking herself into a mental hospital in Tokyo, and then finally to absolute global domination as the world's most successful living artist.
It is one of the most remarkable trajectories in all of art history. It's just a story of sheer, unbelievable endurance.
I can't think of another one quite like it.
It really is unique. So here's a final thought for you to take with you. The next time you see a Yayoi Kusama pumpkin, or you see a friend post that perfect selfie from an infinity mirror room, just pause for a second.
Right. We see these works now as so joyful, so colorful, so Instagrammable. But knowing what we know now, that they stem from terrifying hallucinations, from abuse, from a desperate fear of being obliterated, does that change how we look at them?
It has to, doesn't it? And it raises a question. When we engage with her work, are we participating in her healing process, or are we just consuming her trauma because it looks cool on our feed?
Is it sympathy, or is it just aesthetics? That's the question.
Look a little closer at the dots next time. Thanks for listening to this deep dive.
See you next time.